Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're plunging into a stack of sources you've shared, exploring a point where, well, monumental science meets a truly chilling urban legend.
That's right. We're talking about the Kola Super Deep Borehole Project, a real world record-breaking feat of engineering, and this terrifying well-to-hell narrative that somehow got stuck to it.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Your sources include articles and research detailing the actual scientific goals and outcomes, sitting right alongside pieces outlining the wild conspiracy claims, the so-called evidence, the, solid debunking, and even why this story just won't seem to die.
Right, so our mission in this deep dive is to go through this material. We want to understand the actual scientific achievement, definitely, but also explore the horrifying claims about what was supposedly found down there.
Look at the supposed evidence, too, and the real counter-argument.
Exactly, and crucially try to figure out why this particular story has such, well, enduring power. It's really sticky.
Okay, so to start, let's ground ourselves in the reality presented in these sources. What was the Kola Super Deep Borehole Project? Like, what were they actually trying to do?
Well, the sources make it clear this was a state-funded mega project straight out of the Cold War era. You can think of it almost like the Soviet Union's version of the space race, but instead of going up, they decided to go down, as far down as humanly possible.
Right, I remember reading about the U.S. attempt, Project Mohole.
Yeah, exactly. That was trying to drill into the oceanic crust, which is thinner. But the Soviets aimed for the much thicker continental crust up on the Kola Peninsula, a much bigger challenge, technically.
And the purpose wasn't really about finding oil or minerals, at least not the main goal. It was more pure science.
Exactly, yeah. The stated goal was fundamental science, to get actual physical samples and data from deep within the Earth's crust, understand its composition, its structure.
See what it's really made of down there.
Right. Investigate seismic boundaries like the Moho discontinuity, study how rocks behave under just immense heat and pressure, maybe find deep water or gases. It was all about pure geological discovery.
And they started this back in 1970, you said, and it took them ages.
Yes, May 24, 1970 was the kickoff. And the drilling was incredibly slow, like unbelievably slow. It took over 2 decades, more than 20 years, to reach their maximum depth.
Wow. And they kept breaking depth records along the way.
They did, yeah. Over and over. They got past 12,000 meters, that's 12 kilometers, by 1983.
And the final depth was?
The deepest they ever reached was 12,262 meters. That's over 12.2 kilometers, or about 7.6 miles straight down. They hit that mark on June 6, 1990.
And that's still the record, the deepest anyone's ever drilled.
Yep. To this day, it's still the deepest artificial point on Earth. Nothing's gone deeper.
That number, 12.262 kilometers.
Yeah.
It's hard to even visualize that kind of depth.
It really is. One source used this analogy I liked. Imagine dropping an Empire State Building into the hole. You'd need to stack something like 22 of them, end to end, just to reach the surface from the bottom.
22 Empire State Buildings. Okay, that helps. That's insane.
It was just an absolutely unprecedented engineering challenge. Logistics, too.
And I guess pushing limits like that meant they hit some huge technical problems, but also maybe made some surprising discoveries.
Absolutely both. The challenges were immense. The temperature, for one, it just shot up way faster than their models predicted. At 12 kilometers down, it hit around 180 degrees Celsius. That's 356 Fahrenheit.
180 C, that's hot.
Way hotter than they expected. They were thinking maybe 100 C, so nearly double. And that heat just wrecked the equipment. Drill bits failed, instruments melted. It was constant.
I can almost picture the metal just warping under that heat and pressure.
Exactly. And the pressure itself was another huge factor. The rock down there, under that much pressure and heat, it didn't behave like normal rock. It became kind of plastic. It actually started flowing like a super thick fluid, trying to squeeze the borehole closed behind the drill.
So the Earth itself was literally trying to push them out.
Essentially, yeah. It was this constant battle just to keep the hole open, let alone drill deeper. It made things incredibly difficult, almost impossible towards the end.
But they did find some interesting stuff, too, before it got too tough.
Yeah, the sources highlight some really cool scientific findings. Like, they found water, liquid water, surprisingly deep, over 9 kilometers down. And this is in crystalline rock, where you wouldn't really expect to find it.
Water that deep in solid rock, that is surprising.
It was a major finding, yeah. And maybe even more astonishing, they found microfossils. Tiny fossils of plankton encased in rocks that were over 2 billion years old.
Whoa, wait, fossils, like evidence of ancient life that far down?
Yep. At depths where, conventional thinking said life, or any signs of it couldn't possibly exist. These were really significant, fundamental scientific discoveries coming out of the project.
Okay, so it was this huge scientific effort, amazing discoveries, incredible challenges, but it eventually stopped. Drilling ceased in '92, and the whole place was abandoned later. The sources give pretty clear reasons for why, right? It wasn't mysterious.
Not really, no. The sources point to a combination of factors, pretty straightforward ones, actually. First, those technical limitations we just talked about. The extreme heat, the rock behaving like plastic. It just made further drilling with the technology they had back then pretty much impossible.
The equipment just couldn't take it anymore.
Right. Stuff was melting, deforming, the hole was collapsing in on itself. The difficulty and the cost just became astronomical. And then, the timing. The Soviet Union dissolved in 1991.
Right. Huge political change.
Huge. And that led to massive budget cuts for all sorts of state-funded mega projects, including COLA. Basically, the funding just dried up. No money, no political will anymore in the new Russia.
So the reality is this amazing scientific and engineering feat, a real monument to human ambition, that ultimately got stopped by the brutal physics of deep Earth and, well, the collapse of a superpower.
That's the factual account you get from the scientific sources, yeah.
Yeah.
A story of incredible achievement hitting the hard limits of technology and funding.
Okay. But this is where things take that sharp turn into, well, nightmare territory. Because somehow, out of this factual project, this completely different, terrifying narrative exploded. Though, well to hell.
This is where the legend kicks in, yeah.
Yeah.
And it seems like it largely traces back to one specific thing, this really infamous audio recording that started doing the rounds in the late 80s, early 90s.
The recording. This was the one supposedly captured by microphones lower down the hole.
That's the story, yeah. According to the legend, after the drill supposedly broke through into some kind of empty space, they lowered microphones down. And what came back was just screams.
Like human screams.
That's the claim. Human screams, wails, tortured cries. Millions of them, supposedly. The sounds of hell.
Okay, that's instantly chilling. How did this recording and the story spread?
It seems it started, oddly enough, with a Finnish newspaper article. Then it got picked up by other outlets in Scandinavia, and from there it just blew up. Early internet forums, chain emails.
Oh yeah, the early days of viral content.
Totally. And it got huge traction on fundamentalist Christian radio stations in the US, particularly Trinity Broadcasting Network, TBN. They push it hard. It went viral before we really called things viral.
And there's usually a figure attached to it, right? A scientist who heard the sounds?
Yeah, often this figure called Dr. Azakov, though he seems to be entirely fictional. The story usually paints him as this, hardcore atheist, a loyal communist scientist.
The ultimate rationalist.
Exactly. Who then supposedly has this dramatic conversion experience after hearing the sounds. There's this quote often attributed to him, something like, "As a communist, I don't believe in heaven or the Bible, but as a scientist, I now believe in hell."
Wow, so the conspiracy narrative says they didn't just find hot rock down there at 12 kilometers.
Oh, no, not at all. The core claim is way more dramatic. It's that they didn't hit more rock, they broke through into a huge empty space.
Yeah.
A vast cavity deep within the earth.
An actual void.
Yeah. And this cavity wasn't just like a geological anomaly. It was the literal biblical hell, or, some equivalent underworld, a realm of eternal suffering.
And the temperature, I bet it wasn't just 180 C in this version.
Not even close. While the real temp was hot, 180 C, the conspiracy claims the temperatures in this cavity were thousands of degrees. A fiery inferno, just like the classic depictions of hell.
Okay. And other weird stuff too, lights, apparitions.
Some versions mention that, yeah. Bizarre phenomena, strange lights seen down the bore, maybe even apparitions glimpsed, just unexplainable, terrifying things.
But the sounds, the screams, that's really the linchpin, isn't it?
It absolutely is.
Yeah.
That terrifying audio recording is the crucial piece. The claim is that microphones lowered to the point of the breakthrough recorded undeniable proof of mass human suffering. Screams, wails, cries of millions of tormented souls. Not geological noise, but human agony.
Undeniable proof they'd reached hell.
That's how it's presented, yes. Empirical evidence.
And some versions of the story go even further, suggesting they didn't just hear things?
Right. Some variations claim the drilling actually disturbed something, that it unleashed demonic entities or some kind of powerful negative energy from below, and this caused, terror, madness, maybe even physical harm among the crew working there.
So they didn't just find hell, they potentially opened a door to it.
That's the implication in some tellings, yeah. A very dangerous door.
Okay, so if they supposedly found hell, how does the conspiracy explain the official shutdown, the scientific findings? It all gets labeled a massive cover-up.
Precisely. The narrative insists that everything related to this horrifying discovery, the sounds, the cavity, the heat, was immediately slapped with a top-secret classification by the Soviet and later Russian government. Maybe even other world powers were involved in keeping it quiet.
And the people who worked there, the scientists, the engineers.
Silenced, according to the theory. Allegedly sworn to secrecy under threat. Maybe some disappeared or were even murdered to stop the truth leaking out. Anyone who tried to speak out was discredited, maybe institutionalized.
So the official reasons for stopping the heat, the rock plasticity, the lack of funding those are just lies, fabricated excuses.
Completely dismissed, yeah. Proponents argue those reasons are flimsy. They say, look, Soviet pride and their massive scientific ambition wouldn't have been stopped by mere technical problems or budget cuts if it was just a normal geological project.
They would have found a way.
That's the argument. So stopping so abruptly, right when they were supposedly getting close to major discoveries, just when it was getting interesting. That must mean they hit something so terrifying, so reality-shattering, that it forced an absolute immediate halt and a global cover-up.
That's quite a chilling and internally consistent narrative they built.
It is. And your sources show this core story isn't static. It branches out, connects to other conspiracy themes too.
Like what? How does it expand?
Well, one big thread is the idea of a wider scientific cover-up. The claim isn't just that the Soviets hid it, but that mainstream science, academia worldwide, is actively complicit.
Complicit how?
In suppressing this truth because, well, it would completely shatter the dominant materialist worldview. It would prove the existence of the spiritual, the paranormal, maybe even God or the devil in a way that scientific dogma just can't handle.
So science itself is part of the conspiracy to keep us from knowing about the afterlife. Or at least hell.
That's the idea in that thread, yeah. Then you have the more direct religious and esoteric implications. For many fundamentalist Christians, it's seen as concrete, scientific proof of a literal biblical hell. It validates their faith in a very tangible way.
More powerful than just scripture.
Exactly. For others, maybe more New Age or esoteric thinkers, it's interpreted differently, like a portal to another dimension. Maybe a lower astral plane filled with negative entities.
And the idea that disturbing it actually did something, unleashed something.
Yes, that's a common element. That the drilling literally let evil forces or negative energies seep out into the world. Some theories link this supposed event to subsequent increases in global conflict, maybe mental illness rates, or even natural disasters, like poking the hornet's nest.
And sometimes religious institutions are looped in too?
Sometimes, yeah. Theories might suggest established churches are also part of the cover-up, maybe to maintain control over the narrative of hell, or simply to prevent mass panic if the full truth got out.
Okay, that covers the scientific and religious angles. What else? Is there a military connection sometimes?
Oh, definitely. There's a distinct military or black project variation. The claim here is that Kola wasn't really just a scientific project, it was a cover.
A cover for what?
For a covert military operation. The true goal, in this version, was to access some kind of unique geological anomaly, maybe a hidden chamber, or even a powerful deep earth energy source they detected.
And what they found is now being weaponized.
That's the implication.
Yeah.
Whatever they found is now being studied, controlled, maybe weaponized by some shadowy military-industrial complex. This often links up with broader conspiracy theories about secret underground bases and hidden technologies.
Right. And the human cost is always emphasized in the story, isn't it? The effect on the workers.
Very much so. You hear these stories, often unverified, about the personnel suffering severe psychological effects, breakdowns, hallucinations, utter madness, attributed either to the sheer terror of the sounds, some kind of psychic influence from below, or just the horror of the discovery itself.
Physical effects too.
Sometimes, yeah. Physical illnesses are occasionally blamed on exposure to whatever was supposedly down there.
And inevitably, this sometimes gets tied back to the idea of a shadowy global elite, right?
It often does, yes.
Yeah.
The notion that the knowledge of hell, or this powerful subterranean force, or whatever they found, is now controlled by a hidden global elite, maybe the Illuminati or a New World Order type group.
And they're using it. How?
Allegedly. Either to maintain control over the population through fear, or perhaps they found some unique energy source or mineral deposit down there alongside the horror, and they're monopolizing it, keeping the real power and resources for themselves.
Okay, so that's the full terrifying picture painted by the conspiracy theory and its variations. Given all that, what do the proponents, the people who believe this, actually point to as their evidence? What's the proof?
Well, the absolute bedrock, the thing it all comes back to, is that audio clip, that recording of the screams and wails. It's presented as the smoking gun. Undeniable, genuine proof that they captured sounds from hell itself.
They argue it just can't be anything natural.
Right. They say the sheer terror, the agony you supposedly hear in those sounds. It's impossible to explain through normal geology or drilling noise. It has to be supernatural suffering.
So for believers, hearing is believing. That's the core proof.
For many, yes. Then, kind of supporting that is the sheer scale of the project itself. The fact that it was the deepest hole ever dug.
How does that become evidence?
The reasoning goes something like this. They dug too deep. Humanity pushed its limits so far down into such an extreme environment that it makes it plausible, even likely, that they'd encounter something truly extraordinary, something beyond our normal understanding of the physical world. The unprecedented depth makes an unprecedented discovery seem less outlandish.
Okay, I see the logic there from their perspective. And the shutdown. The official reasons aren't accepted.
Not at all. The official reasons, the heat, the funding cuts, the technical problems, are dismissed as flimsy excuses. Just a cover story.
Why flimsy?
The argument is that Soviet pride, their massive investment, their scientific ambition, they wouldn't have just given up because things got a bit hot or expensive. If it was just a geological project, they would have found a way.
So the fact they did stop is suspicious in itself.
Exactly. Stopping right when they were supposedly getting close to the mantle, just when it was getting interesting, as the saying goes, that points, for believers, to something horrifying forcing their hand, an absolute showstopper that required a total halt and immediate cover-up. The mundane explanation becomes evidence of the cover-up.
Interesting immersion. What else? Are there witness accounts?
They often point to anecdotal accounts and supposed leaks. These are usual unverified stories, things you might find circulating online or in, fringe media outlets. They purport to be from former personnel or people in the know.
And they describe scary stuff.
Yeah, hinting at terrifying experiences on site, strange occurrences, a pervasive atmosphere of fear among the workers. Even though they're unverified, these stories serve as a kind of eyewitness testimony for those inclined to believe the conspiracy.
And the fact that most actual verifiable former workers don't talk about demons or hell, how is that explained?
That's actually twisted into proof of the cover-up. The silence of the majority isn't seen as evidence against the story, but as evidence that the silencing campaign worked. They were effectively threatened, coerced, maybe paid off, or worse.
So the lack of evidence becomes evidence.
Okay, and the historical context helps sell this idea too, the fact that it was the Cold War Soviet Union.
Because they were known for secrecy.
Exactly. The USSR was notoriously secretive, classified everything, controlled information tightly. So the idea that anyone could pull off hiding something this massive, this world-shattering, it would be the Soviets. That makes the cover-up narrative seem highly plausible to many people.
Okay. And there's one more angle connecting it to ancient myths.
Right, the truth and myth trope. Proponents will highlight how almost every culture throughout history has had myths about an underworld, the subterranean realm of the dead or of suffering, Hades, Sheol, Helheim, whatever.
And the Kola borehole is seen as
modern scientific confirmation of these ancient universal truths. They argue these myths aren't just stories, they reflect some kind of innate, collective human memory or intuition about a real place beneath us. And Kola, they claim, finally drilled into it.
Okay. That lays out the conspiracy narrative and the kinds of things its proponents point to as justification. But our sources also contain the comprehensive debunking, the mainstream scientific and historical explanations for everything. Let's get grounded again. What do the facts, as presented in your sources, actually tell us?
Well, when you actually look at the verifiable evidence presented in the sources, the whole well-to-hell theory pretty much collapses, just doesn't hold up to scrutiny.
Okay, where should we start? That audio clip seems central.
Definitely, yeah. And it's probably the easiest part to definitively debunk. That infamous Screams from Hell audio recording. It's not from the Kola borehole. At all.
So where is it from?
It's been identified beyond any real doubt as heavily manipulated audio, mostly lifted directly from the soundtrack of a 1972 Italian horror film called Barren Blood.
A horror movie? Seriously?
Seriously. Directed by Mario Bava. Analysis shows sounds from that film, maybe some other horror movie sound effects mixed into. Audio experts, film historians, they've confirmed it. It's absolutely not a recording from a scientific project.
Wow. Okay, so the core piece of proof is literally fake, taken from a movie. That's pretty damning.
It really undermines the whole thing. And the story's origin isn't mysterious either. It seems it was first circulated by a Norwegian Christian fundamentalist group back in the late 1980s.
As what? A serious claim?
Apparently more as a kind of prank or maybe a piece of, religious propaganda to scare people.
Hmm.
Then it just took on a life of its own and went global.
Okay, so the audio is fake, the origin story is a prank or propaganda. What about the shutdown? Are the official reasons the heat, the funding, really just flimsy excuses?
Not according to the actual scientific and historical sources, no. Those reasons are perfectly sound, scientifically and economically, and more than sufficient to stop a project of that scale and difficulty.
The heat, for example. Was it really that bad?
Yes, that 180 degrees Celsius, 356 Fahrenheit, at 12.2 kilometers. While maybe hotter than their initial prediction, it's actually consistent with expected geothermal gradients at that specific depth in that type of crust. It wasn't supernatural heat, but it was extreme enough to cause constant real-world equipment failure.
Melting drill bits, messing up instruments.
Exactly. Boiling the drilling mud they needed to lubricate and stabilize the hole. It genuinely made further progress incredibly difficult, maybe impossible, with the drilling technology available in the late 80s and early 90s.
And the rock plasticity? That wasn't just an excuse either.
Not at all. That's real geology. At those immense pressures and temperatures, rock deep in the crust does behave differently. It becomes ductile, it flows, it creeps. It really was trying to squeeze the borehole shut. Maintaining the hole's integrity, preventing collapse, became a massive, extremely expensive engineering challenge.
So, real, unavoidable physical barriers.
Right, and then you layer on the funding collapse.
The fall of the Soviet Union.
Exactly, in 1991. That wasn't a minor detail. It was catastrophic for projects like this. The funding taps were turned off for countless massive state initiatives. Cola ran out of money and political backing in a completely transformed economic and political landscape. It's a very well documented and entirely believable reason for stopping.
Okay, and geologically speaking, the idea of a giant empty cavity, let alone hell, at 12 kilometers, that's just not how the Earth's crust works.
Nope. All our geological and seismological data from decades of research worldwide shows that the Earth's interior is made of layers of solid and molten rock. There are no vast, empty voids or hollow underworlds like the theory describes. The crust at 12.2 kilometers is solid rock.
And sounds you might hear in a borehole.
Those are explainable. Seismic activity like tiny earthquakes, the grinding of the drill itself, fluids moving around, the metal of the drill string stressing. There are plenty of potential sources for noise, but nothing that resembles millions of human screams. There's just no scientific basis for that kind of sound originating from geology.
And what about the people? Have any credible scientists or engineers who actually worked on the Kola project ever come forward to back up the well-to-hell claims? Any whistleblowers?
The sources are pretty clear on this.
No.
Despite how sensational the story became, there are no credible accounts from anyone verifiably involved in the project, scientists, engineers, drillers, anyone who has ever presented evidence or testimony supporting the idea they found hell or demons or heard those screams.
So the people who were actually there deny it?
Pretty much universally, yes. The former staff who have spoken publicly about it consistently refute the story. And crucially, the dozens, maybe hundreds of scientific papers published based on the data from the Kola borehole. They detail findings about geology, geophysics, geochemistry, nothing about supernatural phenomena.
Okay, so it seems like when you actually examine the evidence cited by the proponents, it just dissolves under scrutiny. The audio is fake, the shutdown reasons are solid, the geology doesn't fit, and the actual participants deny it.
That's the picture you get from the sources that focus on the scientific reality and the debunking efforts, yes. The core claims of the conspiracy are essentially unsupported, and the main piece of evidence is a known fabrication from a horror movie.
Right. So here's the big question then. If it's so thoroughly debunked, if the facts are so clear, if the people involved say it didn't happen, why does this story persist? What is it about the well to hell that makes it stick in our collective imagination even today?
That's the really fascinating part, isn't it? I think it taps into something really deep and primal in us. That fear of the unknown below. What's lurking deep underground.
Yeah, that ancient fear of the depths.
Exactly. Underworld myths, fiery hells, they're practically universal across cultures for a reason. This story takes a real, complex scientific project and just twists it perfectly into a modern, terrifying confirmation of those ancient, deep-seated fears. It makes the mythical feel real.
It turns a story of human achievement into a cautionary tale about hubris.
Absolutely. And related to that, it provides incredibly powerful religious validation for some people. For certain fundamentalist groups, it's seen as hard, almost scientific proof of a literal physical hell. That's incredibly reinforcing for faith.
And if someone tries to debunk it with facts,
That just feeds the narrative. The debunking itself gets interpreted as part of the cover-up, evidence of the conspiracy trying to hide the awful truth. So paradoxically, trying to disprove it can actually strengthen the belief for someone already committed to the conspiracy. Confirmation bias kicks in hard.
Right. And you mentioned hubris, that whole mankind digging too deep, messing with things we shouldn't. That's a powerful trope too.
Oh, totally. It plays right into that classic archetype. Humanity overreaching, pushing boundaries too far, disturbing forbidden realms. It's a timeless warning against unchecked scientific progress or ambition. The story fits that mold perfectly.
And the specific context definitely helped it take root, right? The Soviet Union factor.
Without a doubt. The fact that it originated in the Cold War USSR, a society known for extreme secrecy and state control, that made the cover-up element seem instantly plausible to many people outside and maybe even inside.
If anyone could hide hell, it'd be the Soviets.
Kinda, yeah. It lends credibility to the secrecy aspect. Any official explanation that sounds too normal, too mundane, like budget cuts or technical problems, automatically becomes suspicious against that backdrop of known Soviet secrecy.
And then there's just the simple allure of a secret, right? Forbidden knowledge.
That's a huge part of it, I think. The idea that something so profound, so terrifying, was discovered and then deliberately buried, hidden from the world by powerful forces. That's just incredibly captivating. It appeals to that deep-seated human desire to uncover hidden truths, to know what they don't want you to know.
It makes you feel like you're in on something big.
Exactly. And we have to come back to that audio again, even knowing it's fake.
Yeah.
The idea of it, the description of it, is powerful. For people who actually heard it back when it was circulating, believing it was real.
That must have been incredibly impactful, visceral.
Absolutely. It offers seemingly direct sensory proof. It bypasses rational argument. If you hear what sounds like millions of souls screaming in agony and you're told it came from the deepest hole on Earth, that's incredibly compelling emotionally, regardless of the logical flaws or the actual source of the sound. It hits you on a gut level.
Because ultimately, the themes themselves, suffering, damnation, confronting pure evil, they're just incredibly potent, emotionally resonant themes.
Way more potent and memorable than, dry explanations about geothermal gradients or rock plasticity curves. The emotional and psychological power of the Well to Hell story gives it a kind of staying power that simple, factual debunking really struggles to compete with. It's just a better, scarier story.
Well, we've certainly done a deep dive into the sources you shared about the Kola super deep borehole today. It's taken us from this really impressive, almost unbelievable scientific achievement
all the way to the chilling Well to Hell conspiracy theory that it somehow spawned. A real journey from fact to terrifying fiction.
We've seen how this monumental feat of human engineering collided with, or rather gave rise to, a terrifying urban legend, one fueled primarily by a hoax audio recording, but tapping into much deeper anxieties and beliefs.
Yeah, the official story, backed by the science and records, points pretty clearly to insurmountable technical challenges that extreme heat and pressure combined with a very real political and economic collapse leading to loss of funding. Those were the reasons the drilling stopped.
But the conspiracy theory offers a far more dramatic, frankly, horrifying alternative. Scientists accidentally breaking through the very crust of the Earth into the literal threshold of hell, hearing the screams of the damned, encountering impossible heat, and triggering a massive global cover-up to hide this terrifying truth from all of us.
And we've explored some of the reasons why, even though the audio is definitively fake and the official explanations are perfectly logical and well documented, this narrative continues to grip people's imaginations. It resonates with those primal fears, it offers religious validation, it plays on our distrust of authority and secrecy.
It really is a powerful case study in how legends are born and why they stick around, isn't it?
It absolutely is. It shows how a compelling, emotionally charged story can sometimes overshadow even the most remarkable scientific facts.
So as you, our listeners, reflect on this incredible story we've unpacked from your sources, maybe consider those echoes from the Kola super deep borehole. Are they, as the legend insists, the genuine screams of the damned, still reverberating but deliberately silenced by powerful forces?
Or are they perhaps merely the lingering whispers of a potent, terrifying piece of fiction, a testament not to a hidden hell, but to our own human mind's remarkable capacity to create, and sometimes desperately want to believe in, the monsters hiding just beneath the surface of the known world.
Something to think about. That wraps up this deep dive for today.